is having people who love Jesus, who are committed to share life with you, and also committed to go on mission with you. What you see in Acts 2 is this beautiful picture of the early church starting to form these communities. And what I love is that you get this picture of the Acts 2 early church believers, and they had very simple things that they did together. It actually wasn't very complicated. What they did was they ate together, prayed together, played together, shared their stuff, and discipled people who were open to Jesus. Yeah. Those 5 components created the spiritual family that had this gritty shared life that was countercultural, but also people who didn't know Jesus were able to fold into that.
Hello everyone, Dennis Allen with the Disciple Dilemma. We keep talking about the culture that inhibits discipleship. Today we're going to talk about the culture that makes discipleship go. Gina Mueller, the executive director for 3DM North America, is in the business of turning around church cultures, as well as building life-on-life community with individual disciples in really interesting ways. So this is a fascinating conversation. I hope you'll stick with us. Listen as Raymond and I talk with Gina and hear her terrific ideas. This was one worth watching. Stick with us. We're glad you're with us. Here we go. Well, today we're talking about Jesus-Shaped Discipleship, folks, and we have a very interesting guest, Gina Mueller, who's coming to us from New England. We're getting a Midwesterner who's moved to the New England territory, which she has described, and I'm going to paraphrase this, one of the most deprived Christian areas in the United States. She can elaborate on that in a minute. Gina, we're so thankful that you'd be with us today. Thanks for joining Raymond and me.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. Very fun.
Raymond, thanks for hanging out today.
Oh, yeah. I mean, God in his great mercy has made you a friend of mine, and I'm still learning the disciplines of patience and persistence and kindness and loving acceptance through this relationship. So I'm just delighted to be with you again today.
Getting better at it. I'm actually slightly pleased with the progress you've made. Okay, Gina, you're the director of 3DM, and I guess if you would unpack how you got there from the Midwest to New England, and how you got in the director's chair, and what in the world is 3DM?
Ooh, that's a lot of questions and a lot of stories. Grew up in Nebraska, lived for about 20 years with my family in Minnesota. And we moved out to Maine in the fall of 2020. And there's a big story around that, but really felt compelled to move to a more post-Christian kind of space to live out the things that we've been living for the last couple decades. So lots to unpack with that for sure. I have been leading 3DM North America for a few years now, which means I lead the team that is on the ground leading regional hubs all around the US and Canada. 3DM has global reach. So there's other wider 3DM family that are really all across the world. And I just get to lead the team that is in North America. And if I was to describe who 3DM is or what we do, when we dig into the Gospels and really fall in love with Jesus, his life, his leadership, how he made disciples, the kind of disciples that he made, which means starting with very normal, everyday people who were not seminary trained, the way that he trained them to do everything that he could do, that's captivating. The movement that Jesus started with regular, ordinary, everyday people that continued to multiply after he was gone, that's captivating.
If I'm a church person, all the things you said before now made sense. But if I'm not a church person, what in the world are you talking about?
I don't know how to create a culture that produces those kinds of disciples unless the leaders go first. And so unfortunately, the grid that we've been given, or the model that we've been given for church, makes church leaders the special people who have seminary degrees and, live in a fishbowl and are told in seminary to create distance in their lives from those that are in their congregations. And most pastors that I have met have never actually been discipled, but they've given their whole life to serving the church. And that's not a diss on pastors. I am one. That's not saying anything negative. It's just saying that the model that we've inherited has created this system whereby we give our lives to the church rather than giving our lives to bending everything, our schedules, our priorities, who we invite around our dinner table, all of those things around the way of Jesus.
When you say the way of Jesus, put some meat on those bones.
So Jesus had this incredible relationship with the Father in heaven that shaped his life on earth, everyday choices, hearing God, doing what he says. You see Jesus prioritizing time with a few and investing his life in a few. And then you see, we have to lean this. Okay, we can't forget the third part, because that's what always gets forgotten with church people. And that is the way that Jesus prioritized the people who were far from God, didn't know him yet. The way that Jesus ate with sinners in a way that made religious leaders sweaty. All of those things, that is just the start of the conversation of the way of Jesus. Then we start talking about the way that Jesus discipled, and that's a whole nother question. But those three loves of his and bending our lives around that is the start of imitating his life and his way.
Yeah.
One of the things you got to remember on this, Gina, is we run this a little bit like Shark Tank. Okay. So if you don't like the way one of us is throwing a question, throw us a question bomb back and force us to dance, especially
Excellent.
Raymond. He really needs to be pushed back a lot. I'm really a nice guy, but he's tough.
So anyway, I am going to push back, Gina, because to me, it's your second love that's missing, not the third one. Most people I know that are church members who aren't involved actively in full-time ministry have lots of non-Christian friends that they see all the time. And most pastors really haven't made friends with people in the church. So to me, the core of discipleship is making lifelong friends who are Christians. Jesus says the key identification of a disciple is not somebody who loves the lost, but people who love one another and serve one another. So how do you get at the leaders and the active people in the church redirecting their efforts towards showing love and service to one another within that church community rather than outside? And I think you mentioned that in passing in some things. So I think that's really at the heart of some of your program. But I don't think the challenge is, if I get discipleship, it's all about apologetics and evangelism, caring for the lost. It's not about loving my Christian brother who's next door neighbor.
So Raymond, you're not actually saying at this moment that we need to forget those folks outdoors. You're just simply saying that it's a lost trait by pastors to connect deeply with people inside the church. Is that what I'm hearing?
Actually, I'm saying that we are supposed to be such a loving, serving community among each other that the lost are desperate to become part of our group.
Can I challenge you back, Raymond?
I hope you will. I'm cheering for you, Gina.
My experience, so I've grown up in church. My experience is that I wasn't trained to be an evangelist. I wasn't trained to bring good news to anybody outside the church. I was trained to invite my friend to church so that the pastor could tell them about Jesus. And so my experience of church is or like discipleship is maybe different than what you're describing.
I agree exactly with there are huge numbers of people who are being trained in evangelism, and evangelism is as weak or weaker than it's ever been. So to me, the missing ingredient is not training people in evangelism in that sense.
It's gritty community
them in the way of Jesus where they love one another.
Yes. The challenge is so often in our churches where we create Christian bubbles. My experience of church is that we actually create Christian bubbles where, so all that I had growing up were Christian friends. I actually growing up in the Midwest, I didn't have non-Christian friends. And then I went to Christian college to become, to go into ministry. And so when I started learning all of this, as a young leader in ministry, what I had to recognize is that I didn't have any non-Christian friends and I didn't know how to make a disciple. But what you're talking about is how to teach people how to build the sense of spiritual family that can go on mission together. And that's what we call family on mission. So when part of what we do is help people understand what it looks like to share their lives with other people, which includes opening your door, sharing your home with other people. You would be surprised how many people don't want to invite other people into their house or around their dinner table for a million reasons. Or they think that it has to be Betty Crocker meets Pinterest every time that you have people in your house, and that's just not sustainable. That's not a lifestyle. That's entertaining. What we're talking about isn't entertaining. It is a lifestyle of living as a disciple who is living on mission. So spiritual family is having people who love Jesus, who are committed to share life with you, and also committed to go on mission with you. What you see in Acts 2 is this beautiful picture of the early church starting to form these communities. And what I love is that you get this picture of the Acts 2 early church believers, and they had very simple things that they did together. It actually wasn't very complicated. What they did was they ate together, prayed together, played together, shared their stuff, and discipled people who were open to Jesus.
Yeah.
Those 5 components created the spiritual family that had this gritty shared life that was countercultural, but also people who didn't know Jesus were able to fold into that.
Folks, we're talking to Gina Mueller, who is the director of 3DM North America. And when we come back, Raymond and I are going to try to really peer into the dynamics of 3DM's ministry with respect to how it affects you and why it matters to you. Stick with us. We'll be right back. Okay, Gina, welcome to Shark Tank. So here's what I want to know. I want to know, how does this thing work? And I want to know what the results are. I need some bottom line, profit and loss. Give me the pitch here. Give me a 2-minute pitch on 3DM's method and results. There's the tough question. What do you say?
Yeah. So the best thing that we do is something that we call learning community. So we're not interested in hosting big conferences. We're we're interested in taking church teams. So not just the pastor. That's vulnerable to have this powerful experience and have to go back and try to get buy-in from people. And so we take a church team through a 2-year process called a learning community. And what they do is they come and be with us for training every 6 months. And during those trainings, we have an incredible biblical foundation where we're casting vision for all of the way that Jesus made disciples, how all of that process. They get team training where they get to contextually apply everything that we're talking about. Nothing that we do is get it out of the box. It looks the same in every context. It has to be contextually applied. And so we help them contextually apply to the story of their church. If they've got deep history, who are their key leaders of influence? All of those things matter. What city are they in? What part of the country are they in? That matters for how you apply things within your context. So we help them actually apply everything that we're talking about to their context. We give them personal experience to some of the discipleship vehicles that we use. And then they leave every immersion with a 6-month plan that is unique to their team and to their context. In between those, we do coaching huddles. So for sure, the senior leader or the team lead is in a coaching huddle. Based on team size, there might be more people in coaching with us. That 2-year process gives them the framework where we walk them through what it looks like to shift the culture. It has to be a personal journey as well as the strategic culture shift. So both of those things are included in the whole process. The tricky thing is, though, Dennis, is that culture shift is not 2 years. There is no culture that you can actually shift in 2 years. Culture shift takes longer, depending on where you're at. You're probably looking at somewhere between 5 to 7, I would even say 7 to 10 years. And so we invite those that want to stay in relationship with us. We have a network of leaders regionally who are committed to this kind of way. It's not a denomination. Everyone still has their denominational affiliations and relationships. It's just a relational network of people who are committed to making disciples and living on mission. Those are just a few of the components.
So if I understand this right, I mean, what you're telling me is you've started to develop a discipling culture, a discipling ethos. We
moved our family across the country on purpose. New England, the latest Barna study that I've seen, of the top 10 most post-Christian cities in the country, 8 of them are in the Northeast, 6 are in New England. And the number 2 is right outside my door. And so we intentionally moved our family to the place where church is not, there isn't churchianity. In fact, my in-laws came to visit for Easter, and my mother-in-law was going to pick up something at the grocery store. And so, good Midwestern lover of Jesus is like, "Happy Easter," saying that to everybody in the checkout lines. And she keeps getting these confused looks, and it kind of takes them a minute. "Oh, yeah, it is Easter, isn't it?" Our family is, intentionally looking for people who are open to us and might be open to Jesus, inviting them into community around our dinner table with us. That's, to us, living a missionary lifestyle is what it looks like to follow Jesus.
I think the thing that I'm hearing from you, which is beautiful, is that we've got to get past a production mentality of mass produced disciples and recognize that the mass production of disciples is actually the gritty, personal, interrelated, life-on-life development of followers of Christ together. I think that's where you're going with that.
In cultural language, what we would describe, if you've got a discipling culture, you're going to value development over delivery. So you're going to have, that can look big church all the way to house church in your living room. So we're going to hire a pastor who can preach amazing, exegete scripture, preach amazing things, so I can turn up on Sunday and hear God's word. And then we're going to create programs that are time bound, where I get to turn up maybe once a week or something like that for a small group. It doesn't ever have to meet in my home, so nobody ever has to see my dust bunnies or, my uncleaned corners of my house or whatever. But we're going to create programs that are time bound, and then we're going to send money to missionaries who apparently have the call. They're way better at this than I could ever be. That is a sarcastic way of describing some of the model of the church that we've been handed, which is led by experts. So you have, we hire the expert to do the thing. That is such a far cry from the way that Jesus made disciples and the kind of disciples that he made. And so some of the culture shift is shifting that to looking at the lifestyle of the disciples that Jesus made, who didn't have to go to an expert to get fed, but instead they learned how to dig for God's presence for themselves.
Jesus was a manufacturing guy for over 20 years and completely unremarkable.
Yep.
Comes back to Luke. He comes back in Luke to Nazareth and reads about the Messiah and says, "I'm that guy." And these are his closest neighbors who've known him since he was a kid. And they go, "You can't be the Messiah."
Yeah.
What does that mean about holiness and living? And so one of the challenges is everything I do is part of my discipleship. You seem like you agree with that kind of cultural shift is fundamental to moving from the model you were talking about, where I am in a small group where I don't know much about the other people in the small group, to a place where I'm really part of a community where people care about me and I care about them.
Absolutely. One of the things that I am deeply fascinated by about the way of Jesus is that the way that he chose everything to flow is through spiritual family. And so the way that I read the Gospels is that when Jesus started calling disciples, it wasn't just into an information transfer kind of training program. He was actually creating spiritual family. And you have the disciples, but then you see this wider spiritual family that Jesus continues to circle back to, including Mary and Martha and Lazarus and others who are in his wider spiritual family. And then you see Jesus when he left and he told the disciples to go and do everything that he just taught them how to do. What do? They create spiritual families that lived on mission together. And so that spiritual family, I don't know how to live this life. It's not even just about a support system. It's about, as you're describing, Raymond, it's sure we can talk about iron sharpens iron, but there's something about this. It's almost like a spiritual discipline of vulnerability, of choosing to live vulnerably with other believers who I know have my back, who are going to like warfare, battle, pray me through things, who are going to challenge my character when that needs to be challenged, who are going to come alongside us when our family during challenging times. It's that kind of stuff that actually makes this life sustainable.
So what I'm trying to explore is a lot of people jump on to say, man, churches just aren't hacking it. Pastors just aren't hacking it. They're not doing what they should be doing. And of the 27 now pastors we've had on up until now, 25 have said, I want out of here. I'm not having fun. I'm looking for other places to go. This is a tough life. These people like Raymond are hard work. They're just, people like Raymond are just really, really hard. That's kind of where I'm going. So was hoping you could tell us the story. What's it like in terms of life pressure, stress, and dynamics as a pastor in New England?
Okay. What feels tricky for pastors is that there is a lot of pressure to perform. There's a lot of metrics that you're accountable to. When you're measuring, when your measure of success is how many butts in seats, how many dollars came in the offering plate, how many people showed up to the thing, there is an incredible pressure to continue to perform and all of the things. What has been life-saving for my years in ministry is finding community who I can be real with, people who where I'm being discipled, but a lived community who aren't looking at me just like the pastor, but are actual like shared life, spiritual family for us. But what can feel really tricky for pastors who are in the old model with the old metrics is to feel like you have to continue to up your game. So perform a little better or get more people or whatever. And the challenge is that what that does is it actually keeps us from organizing a pastor's time and schedule around the real priorities of Jesus. So like discipleship feels like the carving out time in a pastor's schedule for a small group of people that you're giving your life to and investing in, and even folding into family life and other things like that. That's rare. That should be in a pastor's job description, but honestly, that's really rare. Helping pastors start to rewrite their job description in a way that starts to include a priority around making disciples. When I look at the life and way of Jesus, he invested everything that he had into a few, but then that ministry multiplied. So I would start to ask questions about how you spend your time and who you spend your time with. How much time goes into a Sunday morning service? Is there a way to build teams, like a teaching team? Is there a way to share resources with other churches that have a similar set of passions and things like that? Is there ways that you can share resources during the tricky season where you're trying to make leaders and invest in other people so that the ministry can go further?
If you have a culture, I'm going to try and say this in a way that you can either agree with me or push back, but if you have a church that is built on, I'm going to use a term that some of you are going to freak out, I'm going to get a bunch of emails about, but if you have a church that is built on an autocratic structure of the pastor, the clerics are responsible for everything. The clerics, the pastors have to do everything, have to heave everything, have to make everything. That's probably a very typical institutional church structure. This is not a criticism of pastors, not a criticism of church. It is American culture writ large.
Yes.
If, on the other hand, you have a culture that is built on an interdependency of lives, whereby the pastor is an asset, but not the asset, then we're beginning to have a conversation. Am I tracking with you?
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah, I one of the things that I try to help when I talk to pastors, which is challenging, is that making disciples is a way to do less, not more.
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah, that you need to make friends, and those friends will have skills and assets and passions similar to yours. And so number one, just collaborating with them, doing the same things you do now will lighten the load. But you'll eventually find people, leaders, friends who are perfectly capable of doing things with you that really expand your capability. Plus, you won't go home lonely every night wondering why you're in ministry.
That's right.
Okay, Gina, you've got a program which basically starts with the phrase gap year, 18 to 29-year-olds. Tell us about that.
Yeah, we've created this new program called the Discipleship School, and we're inviting high capacity young leaders to spend 10 months with us. And what we're doing is high levels of personal discipleship investment, as well as really contextual missionary training. And so they spend 10 weeks in 4 different locations, 10 months total. And they're going to get to spend those weeks with those of us that are leading 3DM. So they really get access to high level leaders within the 3DM movement. And they are going to spend 10 weeks with us, folded into our spiritual families, all of our church rhythms, missional rhythms, all of those things. We teach them how to contextualize mission into these 4 very different missional contexts. So they are with us in Maine, and then they go to Fort Wayne, Indiana, and then our team in Compton, California, and then they land in Lima, Peru, where they get to experience the Amazon jungle and all sorts of wild things. And so what we're looking for is high capacity young leaders who, with enough investment, with the kind of investment that we're offering them, will be able to plant gospel communities on the other side. High capacity young people who are not just looking for a cool travel experience, not just looking for information transfer kind of discipleship, but are looking to learn how to build gospel communities in wherever they land on the other side.
Gina, how do we get in touch with you folks if we've got people watching who want to explore more? They've got someone they're thinking about who might be involved or interested in your gap year, or they want to just learn more about how you can help their church. How do we reach out to you all?
The best starting place, I would offer a couple things. I would go to our website. So 3DMovements.com. And what you'll find is everything from free resources to books, to information about coaching, even information about learning communities that we talked about. And that will help you connect with the regional hub around North America that's closest to you. I would also recommend the Everyday Mission podcast. And that's where we're telling stories of everyday people who are bending their lives around the way of Jesus and living missionary lives wherever they're planted.
Okay, folks, so you're seeing the website on the screen as Gina's described it here, and there's 2 tracks for you to follow if you want to learn more about that. Gina Mueller, parent, podcaster, who has I screwed that one completely up. I was going to try to say something like this. I was going to say Gina Mueller, who is a pastor, a parent, a podcaster, who is a bride, who has someone who is working in discipleship. Thanks for being with us today on the Disciple Dilemma.
Thanks for having me.
Raymond, anything you want to cover before we wrap this thing?
Thank you, Gina. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Folks, we could sure use your help if you'll follow us on YouTube, on LinkedIn, on Instagram, on Facebook, and on the RSS feeds, as well as our website, www.thediscipleddilemma.com. Check us out, visit us, and talk to us. We want to help get the word out that discipleship in the Western world has been hacked, and it's up to us as followers of Christ to serve Him by bringing it back to the biblical model Jesus gave us. We hope that you'll stick with us. We hope that you'll follow us. Thanks for listening.